Hey everybody, I'm Tim and today we're looking at the breed of the seed. And you're watching Cigars Daily. Get a hell of a lot more out of this video when you join the community on Cigars Daily Plus. Hey, get a hell of a lot more out of this video when you join the community on Cigars Daily Plus or when you watch it on Rumble. Hey everybody, get more out of this video when you join the community on Cigars Daily Plus or when you watch it on Rumble, where I'll give my opinion on some of the best wrapper seed variety. But get more out of this video when you join the community on Cigars Daily Plus or when you watch it on Rumble. This is going to take some time. Get more out of this video when you join the community on Cigars Daily Plus or when you watch it on Rumble, where I'll give my opinion on some of the best seed varieties. Welcome back to the Secret Language of Cigars, where we are decoding the words that we use all the time, but don't really fully understand when it comes to the wrapper and the binder and the filler and all these superfluous terms about cigars. So far in this series, we've gone through the growing regions of the major cigar making countries. We've looked at the other cigar growing countries around the world. And by the way, it turned out there were a lot of them. We've even looked at the plant primings on the leaves in the plant that come out of the field to demystify so many of these terms. But today's video, if I'm being totally honest with you, is the reason I did this whole series. This is the one that I wanted to get to because today we're going to talk about seed varietals. This is one part of cigars that is deeply fascinating because it accounts for a colossal amount of the variety of different types of leaves that are out there. It's part of the reason we call them varietals. There are a lot of different kinds of seeds, and at the end of the day, they all grow the same plant, but each seed gives its own unique and special contribution to what sort of flavor is going to grow on the leaves of that plant. This is, by the way, exactly the same as the idea of genres of music. At the end of the day, all music is just made up of two things: rhythm and notes. Those two things are the total composition of all music out there. But when you start with those two things in different ways, you get all the genres, amazing sounds like jazz, classical music, and rock, and even terrible stuff like country music, or worse yet, Beyonce's country music. It's really an atrocity, but it's a totally other video. The truth is, in the world of cigars, so much of the variety of flavor we get comes from these seed varietals, and that's why I've been so excited to bring you this today. So with no further ado, I want to jump in, and I just want to ask you to comment down below. You're going to see some seed varietals in this video. I'm using primarily varietals that appear in the wrapper leaf of a cigar. There are other seed varietals that exist, a handful of them, but this covers the bulk of them that are out there. And so as we dive in, put your favorite seed varietal you see in this video down below in the comments, and I can't not wait to hear what it is from you. And now with no further ado, let's jump right in. Up front, the great news is these varietals can be easily split up into different segments depending on where the seed originated. And this is one area where Cuba is going to play a massive role. I spend a fair amount of time on this channel ragging on Cuban cigars, but the truth is Cuba has been the home of cigars for a very long time. So much of what we do in the cigar world today in terms of tradition and in terms of our seed varietals comes out of Cuba. So the first few are our Cuban origin seed varietals. Kicking it off with number one is the Creoyo Seed. The Creoyo Seed varietal is one of the OG, old school Cuban strains that goes back hundreds of years. Today, it's been spread and grown throughout the world, but when you see this listed in blending information, you're going to notice it quite often says Criollo 98, which is a reference to a specific strain of the Criollo that is particularly resistant to diseases that kill entire crops of leaf, and those are things like blue mold and black shank, the two most dangerous things. So when you see that Criollo 98, you can know that that is a seed that has been specifically produced by farmers, not genetically modified, through traditional farming techniques to be resistant to these things, but it also gives off this natural, very spicy, very bold, earthy, and naturally sweet flavor that can vary a little bit depending on what kind of soil it was planted in, what kind of sunlight, and how much water. But the general characteristic of the Creoyo seed lends it to like a really healthy growing crop and to a really nice bold flavor. A great example of cigars that use this, of course, Aganorsa Leaf uses the Criollo 98 throughout many of their cigars, and especially in the filler, but a cigar that uses this Criollo in the wrapper is Blackbird's Kohjo. That's one that lists it, and it's not one I see used in wrapper leaf a ton. More frequently, that one appears in the filler recipe. And our next big Cuban seed varietal is one that is actually much more commonly used today for wrapper leaf, and that is the Kohjo seed. By the way, if you've been pronouncing it Corojo, here's your sign. But the Kohjo seed is one of the only, I think this is the only seed varietal I know of that is named after the actual farm where it was developed, called the Corojo farm. But today, the seed is known for producing some particularly rich, thick, like rubbery and very oily leaf that has quite a spicy characteristic to it. And a prime example of a project that uses that Corojo leaf is one of like the OG Corojo blends, and that's the Camacho Corojo. This cigar goes all the way back to like the early 90s. It's only, I think, probably 20 or 30 years after the Kohjo seed was developed that we started using this, and it was the Arroyo family who started Camacho Cigars, which today makes one of the most popular Corojos out there. There are lots of brands now that use these Corojo wrapper leaves on them, but it's one that has been popularized through the industry. And it's another seed where you'll see a specific year referenced with the seed varietal, and that's most commonly Corojo 99, which again is a seed that will produce a particularly bright flavor along with a healthy resistance to some of these crop-killing diseases like blue mold and black shank. So for the farmers, it's incredibly important, and for those who love their like peppery or spicy cigars, Corojo is typically a moniker of a cigar that's going to produce a desirable experience. And then we got the king of Cuban seed varietals, and that is the Habano seed. Now, technically, when you say Habano, it's kind of a catch-all for really seeds that originated in Cuba. There's more than one different specific strain or varietal that's going to fit into this, but Habano is something that dated back to Cuba, really to Havana, Cuba. The word turns into Habano, and you find that this seed is typically rich and complex, known for having like a fuller-bodied or earthy flavor profile. These days, Habano accounts for like a profound amount of wrapper leaf in the cigar industry. There's so many of them out there. It's super hard to dial it down to like which Habano there is. Most medium strength cigars out there in my, like from what I can see, have that Habano wrapper on them. There are a few other sort of medium strength wrapper varietals, but Habano is incredibly common. But one prime example of a Habano cigar, so I can show it to you, is Drew Estate's Herrera Esteli Habano. It's like one of very few cigars that has a flavor profile that can kind of be a throwback to what a person might expect from an original or real Cuban cigar. And that's the key with Habano, is that they're trying to preserve what is a long-standing tradition and heritage for cigars from Cuba, but also give them a little bit of new life when they grow that Habano seed in other parts of the world. Now, before we stray away from Cuba and go to some other parts of the world, I should tell you that there are a lot of these seeds that originated in one place and are now grown in another, and you'll see them referred to that way. And the Habano seed's a great example of this. Well, Habano seed originated in Cuba. A Habano is a seed that's not still grown in Cuba. So you might take a seed from Cuba and grow it in Nicaragua and call that a Nicaraguan Habano. Diesel Cigars, for example, uses a lot of binder leaf that is a Habano seed grown in the country of Ecuador. So there you have an Ecuador Habano binder. That's not uncommon to see them grow these seeds in new places. The exciting thing about this is you can take one Habano seed or one handful of Habano seeds and go plant them in Ecuador and go plant them in Nicaragua and Honduras and grow 3 more completely new kinds of seeds over a series of years or generations of crops. But this next varietal is pretty specific and is really grown in just one place. We're going to actually head to Mexico to talk about a seed varietal called San Andrés Negro. Now, this is something that I want to clear up so it doesn't create a confusion. When you read the blending information for a cigar, it will often list Mexican San Andrés as some part of the blend, wrapper, binder, or filler. It doesn't always mean that it's this a varietal of seed. Sometimes this is a reference to a growing region, the San Andrés growing region of Mexico. That being said, at the same time, there's this very specific varietal called the San Andrés Negro, which is a seed that is grown typically in that region. This is one seed where you don't see like a Honduran San Andrés Negro seed grown. It's really grown in Mexico. There's not a ton of cigars out there that use this, or if they do, they don't specifically list this in their cigar. But you can find it proudly listed by Steve Saka in his very well-beloved Sin Compromiso. And shockingly enough, the United States is responsible for producing more seed varietals than Mexico, which seems weird to me because Mexico is just like ever so slightly closer to the equator than the United States. But the tobacco industry was colossal in the US for so many years. And today we find three big varietals that come out of the good old US of A. The first one being the ever popular Connecticut Shade. If you've heard of one seed varietal in through your cigar smoking world, it's probably the Connecticut Shade. Now, this refers to a seed that was grown through the Connecticut River Valley in the US for a long time. Today, most Connecticut seed is grown in the country of Ecuador. And I've mentioned this in our video on different growing regions, but I'll say it here too. The Connecticut Shade seed is one that's grown best and most often grown under cheesecloth. At least that's the way they did it in the United States when they grew it here. There are segments of Nicaragua and other countries where they will put up the cheesecloth and grow the Connecticut Shade underneath. But in Ecuador, there's so much cloud coverage that you can take Connecticut Shade seed and grow it there. And then it's got the same very light, very mild flavor and sort of texture. Connecticut Shade cigars are super easy to see because they're so much lighter in color than so many other cigars. Typically, as the way I put it, they are the color of coffee with creamer in it. It's a very light color, unlike the darker colors you see in some other cigars. A respectable Connecticut Shade blend is one where you're going to find flavors that are creamy, smooth. They're typically milder cigars and can give you some of those very solid tones of like almonds and Spanish cedar together. If I had to give you one example of a cigar with a Connecticut Shade wrapper, it would be the good old Oliva Connecticut Reserve. And before I move on, I should just pick one point up that the very serious cigar nerds, they're going to have like such an issue with this if I don't say it. Technically, the term Connecticut Shade is reserved for Connecticut seeds that are grown in the United States. So like Southern Draw's Morning Glory has a wrapper leaf that's grown in the USA. Most other Connecticut seed is grown in Ecuador, and they don't want to call that Connecticut Shade. It's just called Ecuador Connecticut or Connecticut wrapper. If I don't say that, some of them are going to like point it out in the comments. So you've been acknowledged and I acknowledge you. But the mild-mannered, meek Connecticut Shade is not the only varietal that the U.S. is responsible for. The bold, bad, broadleaf cigars come from the good old U.S. of A. as well. And there's two varietals here that I'll mention. And the first one is the Connecticut Broadleaf. Like the Connecticut Shade, Connecticut Broadleaf seeds also came out of the Connecticut River Valley, and they are known for producing dark, rich, robust, leathery leaves. And typically, Connecticut Broadleaf is a seed that grows a shorter stalk than most other cigar plants. I mean, some broadleaf plants have like half the yield of a regular plant. So what they'll do is they'll do what's called stalk curing. They'll cut the whole plant off of the stalk and hang it in the curing barn as opposed to picking the leaves individually. A fascinating thing about Connecticut Broadleaf is that for a very long time in the cigar world, broadleaf wasn't even considered like a quality enough leaf to use as a wrapper leaf in a cigar. The only cigars that really got a broadleaf wrapper were like ugly cheroot style cigars, the kind of like Clint Eastwood cigar that he'd have while he has a poncho on and he's riding a horse and he's going into a gunfight. But over the last like 10 or 20 years, broadleaf has become the premier wrapper leaf for many stronger cigars. It's become so premier that it's actually gotten really hard to get in the cigar world and quite expensive as well. If you want to look at one very important project that is covered with a Connecticut broadleaf wrapper, you've got to know about Foundation's Tabernacle. This is made by Nick Melillo, who has more than once been referred to as the Baron of Broadleaf. The guy does a spectacular job blending this stuff, but I'll say this, for a lot of the really dark, rich, rugged cigars, people are looking for one with that broadleaf wrapper. Now, even though Connecticut broadleaf is like a profoundly powerful leaf, there is a step above it. And that's Pennsylvania broadleaf, baby. This is a rich, robust, thick, dark, rugged, rubbery leaf that's grown mostly by the Amish and Mennonites. It's one that, unlike other leaves, isn't really taking the seed and then they grow it in a bunch of other countries. If you see Pennsylvania broadleaf specifically listed in the blend, it's more than likely or almost entirely grown in the United States of America. There aren't a ton of projects out there that use the Pennsylvania broadleaf. It's got some limited availability, but one that uses it for sure is the Daily Edition Diesel Desert Walker, a cigar that is impossible to get the ring off of there because I don't know what they do, they weld it onto the cigar or something like that, but the cigar itself has this really rugged, very rich, and quite complex flavor for such a strong cigar. And now we'll head away from the popular varietals of the United States and head down to the country of Brazil, where we see two seed varietals pop up, one popular and one that's growing in popularity, but the first one is the Brazilian Mata Fina seed. Now, Mata Fina is one that I regularly say in reviews. It gets me all hot and bothered and excited when I read about it because it's a seed that produces plants that often are quite bright in terms of their flavor notes. Like citrus and fruitiness is natural to these leaves. Also, this really strong and nice aromatic scent to the smoke, along with like floral undertones, which can also be quite natural. It's best known as Brazil's aromatic gold, and if you want a great example of a cigar that uses this, the H. Upmann by AJ Fernandez Nicaragua Heritage is one that's, I guess it's sort of confusing because it does use that Brazilian Mata Fina leaf, but at the same time, still a very Nicaraguan cigar. But the addition to that blend from the Brazilian Mata Fina will be some of those very bright yet bold flavor characteristics. And as we stick around in the country of Brazil for a seed varietal that produces something stronger than the Mata Fina, we got to talk about my favorite one to say, and that's Brazilian Araparaka seed. Now, while the Mata Fina is brighter, cheerier in terms of flavor, Araparaka is like bolder, stronger, darker. Not necessarily the broadleaf of Brazil, but kind of in a similar vein. It yields a lot of more medium to full-bodied Maduros and is grown pretty specifically in the Araparaka region of Brazil, although it is its own seed varietal. And today, an example of a cigar that uses this seed is the Trinidad Espiritu No. 2, a cigar that in its own right is really dark, really oily on the wrapper, and is a great example of what to expect from the Araparaka seed. Now, up until this point, all the varietals we've spoken about have been from one of the Americas, North America, South America, somewhere in that general part of the world, but now we gotta leave there to find some more of the exciting stuff. And one of these varietals is found in Indonesia, and that's called the Sumatra seed. Sumatra is used to create a leaf that is very silky smooth, like sort of a thinner leaf, but at the same time, something that presents a nice sweetness, a very mild pepper, and can be a little bit leathery in terms of flavor. And while these seeds are grown in Indonesia, like the Connecticut Shade, we also grow them in Ecuador today. It's a seed that I like to see pop up because it can be fermented into many different types of wrapper leaves. While a lot of Sumatra cigars are more medium in terms of strength, sometimes you find a Sumatra seed or a Sumatra leaf that's been like fermented really dark. An example of this is a cigar that I personally prefer called the Kohjo Dark Sumatra. It's a blend that caused me to fall in love with the Sumatra varietal in a completely new and very unique way. The flavor on the dark Sumatra is this like still very smooth flavor, but has a lot of kick to it and plenty of that leather note. And the last one I want to talk about is an important one and perhaps one of the more misunderstood varietals out there, because technically it's not a varietal, which is not something I learned until just this last week. And we're talking about African Cameroon seed, which technically doesn't exist. And let me explain what I mean by that. For a long time, Cameroon wrapper leaf has come from Cameroon in Africa. And there are a few cigars that specifically use an African Cameroon leaf, like the Arturo Fuente Don Carlos, specifically African Cameroon. But these days, when you look at the blending information of Cameroon cigars, you're seeing some pop up that say like Honduran Cameroon seed, which would make it sound like Cameroon is a varietal, much like many of these other varietals, that you can just take the seed and grow it elsewhere. And that's exactly what I thought right up until Jeremiah Mirafel came to visit me at the Cigars Daily HQ. If you don't know who that is, don't worry, because I didn't really know a lot about Jeremiah Mirafel myself. But for over 400 years, the Mirafel family has been an integral part of the tobacco industry throughout the world. And today, the Mirafel family is the sole grower and distributor of African Cameroon cigar that there is. If a cigar has a wrapper leaf on it that's African Cameroon, it came from the Mirafel family. So I sort of feel like they're an authority on what Cameroon is today. Call me crazy, but that's how I think of it. And one thing Jeremiah Mirafel told me is that there is no such thing as a Cameroon seed. All African Cameroon leaf is grown with a Sumatra seed. He said that even in Cameroon today, they use Sumatra seeds from Indonesia, grown in African Cameroon to grow the African Cameroon leaf. And so while like pretty much all other leaves, the wrapper leaf can be referred to for what kind of seed it came from, Cameroon is the one that's really just the name for the leaf. It's Cameroon because it came from the soil of Cameroon, Africa. And according to Jeremiah Mirafel, there is no way to grow a Honduran Cameroon cigar. He would say that that is just a Honduran Sumatra cigar. And right there, we end up with 11 different seed varietals. I should really say 10 seed varietals and an African Cameroon leaf to be more specific, but we end up with like what accounts for the overwhelming majority of seed varietals that you'll read about today. These are so critical for cigars because the way that we define and divide and classify cigars is by the wrapper leaf and most often by the seed varietal that contributes to that wrapper leaf. So a new cigar comes out and they'll say, oh, it's a Habano, or it's a Criollo. Oh, it's a Corojo wrapper. Oh, this is a Mexican San Andrés Negro cigar. It really refers to the leaf that is on the outside of the blend, the wrapper. And while there may be other varietals represented from within the binder and the filler of the cigar, this is absolutely essential and crucial to understanding cigars and the secret language that governs them. Now, I want to invite you again to put your comments down below. Of all these seed varietals you've heard, which one sort of stands out to you as the most interesting? And you can learn more from this video when you check it out on the community on Cigars Daily Plus and on Rumble, where I'll go into some of my top preferences for seed varietals. And so join me over there. I'll spill more of the tea. And I want to thank you all so much for watching. This is Tim signing off for Cigars Daily, and I will see you in the comments.